Hey everybody, and welcome to FindLaw's 5 and 5, the show that takes you through 5 interesting legal stories in about 5 minutes. I'm Joe Falbush, a lawyer and a writer here at FindLaw. So today I'm doing something a little different. Instead of 5 stories from around the legal world, I'm going to be breaking down one legal question that has significant constitutional ramifications for our nation, and that's National Guard troop deployments across U.S. cities. With troops currently in Chicago and legal battles erupting across multiple states, it's important to understand the law behind these deployments. So let's dive into 5 key aspects of what's going on, all in under 5 minutes. Stay with me. First up is a primer on the National Guard. As you may already know, both states and the federal government can call up the National Guard. When activated at the state level, troops operate under state active duty status and they remain under the governor's command and control. But the president can federalize National Guard troops under specific circumstances. Under federal law, the president can mobilize National Guard units from any state if the U.S. is invaded or there's a rebellion. The president can also invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy the Guard for suppressing insurrections, but more on that later. So here's the important part. When the Guard operates under state command, the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally prohibits federal troops from enforcing domestic law, doesn't apply. But when it's federalized, it does. That brings us to what's going on in Chicago. President Trump authorized 300 National Guard troops to deploy to Chicago, and as of this taping, they've been deployed, but they're not yet on the streets of the city. Now, the Chicago deployment has become a flashpoint because it involves multiple states. Not only did Trump authorize Illinois National Guard troops, but Texas has also sent its National Guard to Illinois. This is a highly unusual move that raises serious questions over states' rights and federalism. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has opposed the deployment, and the state's filed a lawsuit to block Trump's National Guard deployment to Chicago. California filed a similar lawsuit not too long ago. Now, the legal battle is far from over, but there have been some victories in the California case. And I will say that the Guard has been activated in Chicago many times over the years, but this deployment is different because of the federal-state tension and the involvement of out-of-state Guard units. Now let's talk about the lawsuits, because frankly it's hard to keep track. But Illinois isn't the only state pushing back against federal National Guard deployments. The core legal argument from these states is that the president's power to call out the National Guard is not a blank check. There needs to be specific statutory grounds under federal law that's invasion, rebellion, or properly invoked Insurrection Act authority, which I'll discuss in a bit. A federal judge has blocked the Trump administration from sending federalized National Guard troops to Portland. That's a significant legal victory for states, arguing that these deployments exceed presidential authority. But that ruling was quickly appealed, and based on oral arguments on October 9th, the Ninth Circuit may well decide to issue a stay of that injunction. Even if it doesn't, if it upholds the lower court and keeps the injunction in place, the Supreme Court would almost certainly weigh in, probably on its emergency docket. If it does so, recent history suggests that the betting money would be on the Supreme Court ending the stay. That means there's a good chance the National Guard will end up going to Portland, at least in my opinion. As for the Illinois deployment, a federal court judge ruled on October 9th that the federal government did not establish that there is a danger of rebellion in Chicago, and it found that the government was still able to execute federal law. The temporary restraining order is in effect for 14 days, but this too is likely to be appealed. The Seventh Circuit would have jurisdiction in that case. It would not necessarily be bound by a decision that the Ninth Circuit previously made, but that would be considered somewhat precedential. Let's get into the legal weeds for a minute, because understanding 2 federal laws is crucial to understanding what's going on. President Trump has not yet invoked the Insurrection Act. Instead, he's using other federal law that allows domestic National Guard deployment, but that law does not allow federal troops to act as law enforcement domestically. This is because of the Posse Comitatus Act, which was passed after the Civil War as a guard against federal troops policing southern states. But there's a major exception, and that's the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act, originally passed in 1807, and it allows the president to deploy military forces, including Federalized National Guard troops, to suppress insurrections or enforce federal law when state authorities are unable or unwilling to do so. They are not bound by the Posse Comitatus Act in that case. The Insurrection Act gives the president broad discretion to determine when these conditions are met. But that's not to say that the president's power to call out National Guard troops under the Insurrection Act is absolute. That's the question that would be litigated. So why does this matter? It means that even if the Supreme Court were to uphold an injunction that prevented Federalized National Guard deployment domestically, President Trump could still invoke the Insurrection Act and litigation would likely start again. Honestly, though, even if President Trump wins both cases, he could still invoke the Insurrection Act as a way to allow National Guard troops greater leeway in performing law enforcement activity. All right, well, my 5 minutes are more than up. I do want to take a quick note that the deployment of Marines to LA a few months ago was found in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, and that currently no regular U.S. military members are being deployed to Chicago or anywhere else. In addition, while some people are very worried about martial law being declared, this is an entirely separate legal analysis. I'm not saying it will or won't happen or that worry is or is not justified. I'm just saying that the legal analysis of the Posse Comitatus Act is separate from whether martial law is declared. All right, well, that's it for now. Once again, I'm Joe Fawbush. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.